Hey everyone, Coach Patrick here, back with another coach lesson done every month, an opportunity for us to do a little bit of a deeper dive into a particular topic relevant to the timing of the season, but also to the questions and comments that we're getting inside the community, right? Our goal here is to make sure that you're the smartest, fastest athlete you can be, and those are inextricably linked. Sometimes the information that we present here can be new. Sometimes it's not. It's a refresher for you. Other times it's just a starting point for discussion that will happen inside the community. Ultimately, you, as the students, as the learners, get to decide. My job here is to present to you some information, give you some food for thought, hopefully give you a path forwards to better training, better racing outcomes as well. All right. So tonight's topic is core temperature management. Super important for this time of year, especially as we head into the hotter months, especially as I think the entire left-hand side of our country is under red alert, literally red alert for the heat. Things are only getting hotter. And when we think about what it means to maintain our ability to perform, a huge part of that comes to heat management. The heat problem that we have as endurance athletes is that there are cascading consequences, some very dire if you really don't listen to your body, which of course none of you will do. You'll always take care of yourselves. But cascading consequences for overexertion or continued steady exertion in rapidly increasing conditions of inclement weather, in this case, extreme heat. And the negative outcome of that is slower times, poorer performance, etc. But that can be mitigated to an extent if we take a couple of key steps to make sure that we're not only ready, but we also understand the parameters of what we're doing. There's places where we have to respect the heat, absolutely. Other places where we do not, right? For example, if you're with your family and you're going to be, going for a hike along a cliff, you're mindful of being careful with your kids near the cliff. But when you're not even starting the hike yet, you're in the parking lot, you're not telling the kids to get back from the edge. There's no cliff there yet, right? So there's times when even in this environment of heat that we want to be very mindful, and places where we don't necessarily have to be as rigid with our restrictions or with our mindset. And so we're going to explore some of that today. All right. So I've got a presentation for you. We'll walk through it. And then as always, feel free to go ahead, reach out, ask questions, dive in more deeply. All right. So here we go. Let me make sure I've got this all dialed in. That is not it. Hold on 1 second here for me. Let me get this right. Hold on. Sorry, folks. I want to make sure I can do this. Oh, it's over here. Sorry. I want to make sure I can do this as a single slide. There we go. Awesome. Now I can do the numbers. Yes. All right, here we go. By the end of this presentation, you will understand the importance of normalizing your temperature. In other words, keeping it locked in and avoiding spikes, which will ultimately have a detrimental effect on your performance because their ability over time to return to normalcy, to homeostasis, becomes severely limited as long as you insist on continually running. Know how to regulate that race day temperature. What are steps you can take to actually make sure that you're in a special place? Special temperature place. Know the role of pacing and nutrition in terms of temperature regulation, how those fit together. When is pacing more important than nutrition? When do they collaborate together? When is not the right time to use either one of those choices? We'll talk about that. And then finally, how do we plan ahead? What are steps that we can take now, early in your training, super early, later, like mid-season, or in taper, final steps before you get to your race? What are the things that we can do beforehand to help you get ready? Ultimately, our goal here is to make sure that you're as ready as possible on the day, and there's lots of opportunities to do that. You don't have to start right now, but there may be some steps that are easier for you to take now than that would be later, okay? Right, temperature is more than just a number. People look at the dial and say, oh, 90 degrees, like, ooh-wee. But what does it really mean? Like, how do we dive into it? And experience is ultimately your best guide. An app on your phone or a forecaster on your television, they're not really going to give you accurate insight as to what that number truly means for you. Over time, as you become more experienced and do racing in a variety of terrains and conditions, you'll begin to understand what 80 degrees means with a certain level of humidity and the type of wind. And you'll just know out of the gate, but that's a hard-earned lesson. And hopefully we can kind of give you some shortcuts today so you'll be better and smarter, not simply be stuck doing what everyone else is doing. So people, when they look up the heat, they look up the number, they say, what's the temperature? And then what's this real feel thing? Like, what does that really mean? At the end of the day, the temperature is just that number on the dial. It's going to be 80, it says 80. It's going to be 90, it's going to be 90. 100, it's going to be 100. The real feel pulls in some other elements and gives a sense for how your body experiences the heat, right? So in other words, not just the number on the dial, it says it's 81, but when your body is in conditions, for example, with a tailwind, high humidity, more moisture in the air, it actually feels much hotter. Like your perceived heat out there is maybe it's 88 on the dial, but that perceived heat is like 92, 94 on like particularly humid, hot days, and that could be really tough, right? Because it's that wet temperature, it's the humidity that really starts to sneak up on you, sorry, and kind of close the walls in on your ability to perform because things just get so hard. Okay. I wanted to talk about this slide a little briefly, just so you kind of get a general sense of what we're operating against, which is to say that all of our exercise generates heat. In this example, we're talking specifically about running. When you metabolize 100 kilocalories, which essentially when you're burning 1,000 kilocalories to run, only 200 of those, like so literally just 20% actually moves you forward. So when you burn 1,000 kilocalories, then you get 20% of that goes to actually moving forward. The other 800 kilocalories, heat, just like heat that just gets dissipated, retained inside your body, inside the muscle tissue, your skin, etc. That begins to raise your core temperature as well. Now let's think about that from a run perspective. It takes 1 kilocalorie per body kilogram to run a kilometer. So, the metric system makes this a little bit easier to normalize. But essentially, if I'm 80 kilograms, it takes me 80 kilocalories to run 1 kilometer, right? If you're 50 kilograms, it takes you 50 kilocalories to run, right? So essentially, no matter how fast I'm running or how big I am, this ratio always stays the same. So if I'm 200 kilograms, oh my goodness, or I'm 50 kilograms or I'm 40 kilograms, that ratio still retains the same. So what does that mean? Well, what it means is that the heating power goes up rapidly as you run faster and as you add weight, right? Because as you get bigger, so if you're 80 kilograms versus someone who's 60 kilograms, I require 20 extra kilocalories, right, to run per kilogram. That's significantly more when we think about what it takes to run if I get just 200 kilocalories for me to work with, right? How far does that actually carry me? And the net being that as I run, insist on continue running and insist on continue running at pace, and I'm not getting any smaller while I'm running, the heating power goes up. It's an exponential curve. And as a result, I start to feel hotter than someone who is smaller than me. Smaller people already have better power to weight ratio when they're running, even cycling as well. The net is that they can put out less work to move their bodies. The bigger athletes have to put out more work, but they're also bigger athletes. So they have to put out more work just to move themselves. But they also retain that heat as well. Because we have heating power and then we have cooling power. How does the heating power and cooling power work? At the end of the day, we are not nearly as efficient cooling ourselves down as we are at heating ourselves up, which is a conundrum that we get into on race day. Now, of course, we can become better at mitigating these consequences by making better pacing choices, better nutritional choices, better equipment choices. But seriously, at the end of the day, on hot days, it becomes all about strategy, managing things to be really smart as well. So I wanted you to sort of understand some of those costs. This is why smaller athletes can run very fast. This is why in an Ironman, we see a lot of elite women running still very fast times after coming off of fast bikes. And I say that in a ratio of performance to the elite men. They're not that far off, but from a total performance basis, they actually do a little bit better than the men because they just end up carrying less heat. They're just not working as hard. They're not generating as much heat from work, and they have less to dissipate. They've got other consequences, of course, for being small and lean, but still at the same time, they don't have that same heat growth, right? So there's essentially 4 dimensions to what I'm going to call your athletic temperature, or the temperature that you not only start with, but the temperature that will evolve over time as you go through the paces of your work. First is your size. Second, we have the sport that you're doing, which modality you've chosen. The third, what are you doing, right? Or is it an easy day? Is it a hard day? Is it an interval day? What does that look like? And finally, how much moisture is in the air? That humidity, that dew stick, something for us to think about. As more moisture gets into the air, the less air movement there is, the heavier the air is, and the more likely that the water remains on your skin, sort of inhibiting sweating and the evaporation of fluids from your skin, which is what actually helps you cool down and can put you in a really tough spot. All right. I had to put some fun pictures in here. Here you go. Not going to get a speeding ticket. Big dude, right? The elephant also never forgets. So the first factor was your size. So essentially, we talked about before, the heavier you are, the more work you have to do to move yourself. So if you and I both want to run one kilometer, but you weigh 40 kilograms and I weigh 80 kilograms, you're going to burn 40 kilograms to do that, I'm going to burn 80. I have to do more work to get there, right? Of my 1,000 kilocalories, I get 200 available for forward motion. If I'm an 80 kilogram athlete running, then it's 80 kilograms per that kilometer. I get 2.5 miles out of that 1,000 kilocalories that I've had to consume, which is not a lot of distance considering how much further I have to run, how big I am, and how many calories I'm burning, right? All right. The second part is the larger you are, the more muscle mass you have, and the more heat that you generate. Men predominantly have larger muscles overall, like just by a genetic standpoint, especially in their legs. As a result, we generate more heat, and since we are bigger than most women, also retain more heat. And that combination becomes really challenging as we start to grow, because as you're trying to work, you're trying to race, you're trying to make decisions that set you up. It's easy to fall into a place where even at an easy pace, you've sort of done some irreparable damage to your goals because you've chipped away at some of your reserves by going too hard. All right. Running is very inefficient. Yeah, I bet my guess is this is a sit down, but this might as well also be sand, right? Like who knows what that could possibly be like, but it looks pretty brutal to me. Definitely make sure you want to stop at the top there. Don't want to head over the edge. Like that'd be pretty bad if you just kind of messed that thing up. I bet someone's tripped when they got up there, that's for sure. So the second factor here, temperature management, your sport of choice. We mentioned earlier that running is the real costly one. You're going to see that here. This is why swimming actually is not that costly, right? The water tends to keep you cool. Ideally, you're not swimming in hot water. And that allows you to dissipate that heat, effectively not storing it inside your body, but having it transfer out, just because the heat sort of evaporates, if you will. The second part is using cycling. When you do cycling, it's non-weight bearing. So it's still work related, but the speed at which you travel for the work that you put in generates wind, and that wind almost always cools you off. Unless you're in some evil space where it's all tailwind all the time. Which if you do live there, let me know so I can go and train there myself. But beyond that, what it means is that we end up in a position where the cycling, despite the amount of work you're doing, actually cools you off because of the wind. We don't get that on running, which is why running is the most costly form of exercise. I've got those numbers in there for you again, just so you know. This means that, as you get better at performing, making better decisions, we know that, adding strength in a particular position and, making sure that you're acclimatizing to the work can be really, really beneficial for sure. It's a pretty massive increase. All right, next slide. Okay, so factor 3, your pace and effort also play a role in your core temperature. Right? It's super important to note that you actually have control over this situation, and you're not just affected by the external elements, but you yourself can actually make decisions relative to the conditions to set yourself up for success. That's probably the biggest takeaway here. I hope you kind of stick a pin in this and remember that. All right. So remember, the more work you do, the greater the heat cost of that activity. So the harder you go, the harder that work is on your body in terms of core temperature. Right. The higher intensity efforts generate more heat. Right. Specifically, as we look at what it means in terms of how it works, like even though you don't require any more calories metabolized, you do generate more heat. So when you go faster, there's just more heat generated per kilocalorie metabolized. As a result, you just end up in a situation where fueling wise, you're okay because you're not requiring any more calories. The issue is just that your body is unable to actually manage itself or regulate the heat and continue to nutritionally process the food that you're taking in, right? Not to mention the other ancillary costs with going too hard in those conditions, right? So as a result, endurance athletes have to be very smart, very deliberate about choosing paces that work. As an example, I'll tell you a story. In Ironman Hawaii, there's a hill, it used to be called Pay and Save Hill, also known as Palani, which back in the day fell at about mile 10. Way back in the day, it was like mile 13. Then it ended up being about mile 10, and now I believe it's around closer to about mile 8 on the course. But the net is that you've been running out along the water on a Li'i drive. It's been like right on sea level, so super pressure on your body. The humidity's there. There's not a lot of wind on you, just the way that it's set up and sheltered in that part of the island. And so you're kind of accumulating a little heat in there if you're not careful. And then we go up Palani Hill, and it's the better part of a half mile of some version of up with a little flat part in the middle, just enough to make you remember what flat is like. And in years past, I've run up that hill and run well. I can run it. I can run it in almost any situation. The issue is that even though my heart rate comes down, my core body temperature was not coming back down again. And in retrospect, I can see that, which is why the remainder of my race, even though my heart rate became under control, as I insisted on moving, I was in trouble. In fact, it wasn't until I stopped moving and allowed some of that heat to dissipate over time was I able to get back to running again. So it wasn't that I couldn't handle the hill itself. I couldn't handle the outcomes of running that hill the way that I wanted to run it because of the core temperature changes in my body. That's something really important to know, right? Finally, moisture matters for sure. When there is high humidity, when there is moisture in the air, your sweat simply doesn't evaporate as readily, right? There's just not that natural sort of convection for the sweat. As a result, the moisture sits on your skin, which makes you feel much hotter, right? It kind of creates this sort of trapped effect. In hotter races, you'll often see other athletes, I do it myself, literally just kind of wiping the sweat off your arms, just trying to get the water off to allow that heat to come through and dissipate, especially when there's not enough convection, again, drawing that heat out of your body through the water. When we run into that kind of a situation, we set ourselves up in a position to really suffer. And that's important. This is why wearing arm sleeves, for example, on the bike makes sense to protect you from the sun and put water on to keep you cool, because as you're traveling that quickly on a bicycle, you do get high cooling effects. Running, we don't get those same cooling effects, and the moisture trapped against your skin actually makes you hotter, right? Good lesson learned, right? Okay, so training protocols for the heat. A couple things to think about. Let's start macro and move to micro. On the macro side, body composition. At the end of the day, you generate less heat and you retain less heat the leaner you are. Now, for most of us, the delta between where you are now or the start of the season and where you want to be or where you are soon to be isn't that great. Maybe people lose a combined total of 2% of their body composition relative to off-season, in-season, but it does make a difference, especially when we talk about marginal gains. And the best way to address that body composition piece is to implement healthy eating habits to make we got a plan for the year. And by that, I mean, know where you want to be by race day. Say if you know by race day you want to be a certain weight and it's attainable and healthy for you, of course, that we can map it out and say, oh, if I wanted to be 180 pounds, but I'm 190 pounds, I want to lose 10 pounds. I've got 10 months to do it. That means I want to lose a pound a month. And my goal is to lose that pound. Essentially, put it on the dial that I'm losing that pound. When I hit that 1 pound, I can kind of chill out there. I don't have to worry about too much about continuing to push forward and accelerate that process. I've got a longer timeline. The longer the timeline you have to cut that weight, the more healthy and sustainable it can be, the more that your basic habits and choices can make a difference, as opposed to having to make drastic changes to your nutritional program. All right. And ultimately review. So once you have this plan, then you go back and review it. You said you were going to be 180 by race day, Patrick. You're halfway there. Halfway from 190 to 180 is 185. Are you at 185 right now? No, I'm not. I'm at 186. So I need to make sure that I'm making strong changes, or smart changes, I should say, so I can stay on track to my goal, right? So that body composition does matter at the end of the day. So obviously we want to show up fit and ready to race and rested, but we also want to be relatively lean as compared to our normal self, because it's just less work to do carrying ourselves around the course, right? The next piece here, acclimation. That's the name of the game, which is getting used to the heat. And this is something you can do at home with a sauna, or you can do with some of your key workouts, depending on where you live and the timing of your race. So first, train in an environment that mimics the day. Recently did some videos about that here in June 2022. And essentially identify that, right? So, do some workout time at the hottest part of the day. Like I may not always have Arizona-like temperatures here where I live, but I do for a couple hours in a couple months. And I can really target those hours for my training and adjust my schedule and expectations accordingly should I really have high performance related goals. Otherwise, maybe it doesn't make as much difference for me because I'm just here to hit the finish line and have a good time, right? The next piece, wear race-specific clothing or use race-specific equipment. So actually get in the process of getting used to it. Like if you want to cool yourself down and you've got one of our Race Saver bags, which you can get at mile18inc.com. That's mile18inc.com. When you think about those bags, we're trying to carry ice and fluids with us to remain cool. But when you're doing your training for this heat sessions, really make sure that you're wearing your racing kit. Is the zipper, does it go far enough? Do your pockets carry enough food? How does it feel after a couple hours in the sun? Is it breathable? Like, are you actually able to sort of regulate and function inside this new suit you're wearing, this tri-suit? Or are you unable to and actually runs into a problem because of some of the synthetic fabrics inside that suit? Whatever it is we want to know, we want to test it out, and we can do it in our training, which becomes really important. And then finally, review that data. Like check that adaptation. Over time, we will see that for relatively the same distance, same effort, same heat, we're going to notice a lower heart rate, which is the easiest way to see it. That your body simply is not experiencing the work and the conditions as hard as it did last time. And that's really a net win for you overall. And it's an opportunity for us to focus on the metric, which is really the outcome that we want, and not so much about just keep cutting more weight or just keep buying new equipment. But this idea that we can put the element of our performance individually on display for scrutiny, execution, and for learning purposes is actually really powerful. Something to think about. Okay. All right. So the last piece here, nutrition. Think about nutrition. A huge part of that is just making sure you're taking in what you need. Not what you want, but what you need. And the way we determine that is take a sweat test. We have a baseline here inside Endurance Station for our sweat test. And from that, you'll go ahead and determine what it is you need. And we'll figure out what your fluid losses are. And as a result, we can then calculate what your fluid replacement needs need to be. That allows us to then help you plan with your training to make sure that you're doing the right thing. So if we have 10 long rides across a 12-week preparation period, that's 10 opportunities to get that nutrition right. We're not going to get it right out of the gate. Very few people do. So how do we make choices? How do we continue to A/B test our workouts and make sure that we're on point? This is where it really happens with the sweat test. So we get relevant baselines to you functionally in your area, your neighborhood, and then we can go ahead and apply those to different areas to see hopefully improved or better results. All right. Now it's time for your equipment. And this is sort of undervalued, but it really does make a difference. Making sure, for example, that you have extra bottles or hip pouches or camelbacks to carry the fluid. You never want to run into trouble when you're out of stuff. And honestly, when you're doing longer sessions in the heat, they almost always go wrong and you have to do some damage control. So don't feel bad about the change in terms of how you're processing things. What we want to think about instead is saying, what are the things that we can do from an equipment standpoint that's going to advantage me? So the first here we have is our bottles. Get the bottles or cages for the fluid. So be able to carry more fluid for sure. Second, carry those extra fluids on the run. This is really important. Not everybody does this. A lot of people will plan on hopping from aid station to aid station, but in training we can't do it. And ultimately we want you to be in control of that nutrition as much as possible. So unless the race is more about speed than endurance, it just happens to be that your pace is endurance. But if it's really about speed, you may make some changes to that version of it. And then finally, test the fabric, test the gear you want to wear. Don't be surprised you get chafed underneath your armpit. That thing's always been chafing. You haven't put on 20 pounds. You just didn't notice it earlier, or maybe there was a change of environment or where you were. As a result, it's easy to lose sight of the fact what really drives us forward from a temperature management perspective. And putting the seal of approval on here really means that we're looking at this as an opportunity for massive growth from a performance standpoint. We want you to realize it as much as possible. All right. Racing protocols for the heat. So first, check that weather. I mean, you're already kind of just surf on the phone anyway, but we want to keep that up. You can get this great app. It's called Epic Ride app. The Epic Ride app allows you to take the route as a GPX file, import that in, and then overlays dark sky weather on top of it. So I can see that by the time I get to 11 a.m., this is where I'll be, and this is what the weather will be like in that space. Super powerful and an opportunity for us to kind of get better about making those choices. Finally, we have that real feel on AccuWeather. That's the one that kind of really shows you where you're at. So if it says 72 temperature, 72 real feel, pretty good, pretty low humidity. If it says 72 temperature, but like 76 or 78 degrees, then we have a problem. And it's more often than not, it's some version of humidity or just sort of like accumulated heat overall, just on a district or municipal level. So we want to be really mindful of that and run when we know what the perceived temperature is, and not just run because I put a run workout on, then you want to go forward. Like, let's really get that dialed in. Understand that those weather apps are only as good as the last person who used them, and don't get too fired up about it on these races where they put an imaginary finish line but call it halfway. It's really powerful and an opportunity for others to really be in a space where you can race well and not worry so much about the conditions. And all of that comes from acclimation. Can you do your training? Can you get ready? All of that stuff. Another element here, following your race plan. This is super key, and a lot of people overlook this, but you can actually formulate a plan sitting down at your computer that will allow you to swim, bike, and run at an effort that's very sustainable and can be empowering as well. And that allows you to go through and say, hey, I want to review my race simulation and my data. I'm going to do it. I'm going to look at my long course training plan, documentation for us. And then finally, there's even the marathon plan if those of you are marathoners. But the net here is that you want to go to the source to follow that race plan. Don't just do what everyone else is doing, but go to the archives here inside Durham Station, get these plans out, start filling them in, come back, and then reconcile with your peers and come to terms with what you think is possible. If there's something new there or a lesson learned or a reflection, share it inside our community. We'd love to hear from you. Okay. No real questions tonight, which is fine. When we think about managing your temperature, the key thing for us here is to make sure that you're always wearing a heart rate monitor when you're training, especially as we move into the warmer part of the season. The longer you have that heart rate monitor, the more data we have. What that allows me to do as a coach, or for you as a self-coached athlete, is to go back to some of those critical sessions. So if we're looking at long runs, go back and look at long runs. We can go ahead and say, what is your average temperature for these long runs? So take all of your long runs, say 9 long runs in a block. What's your average heart rate for all of them, right? Great. What was the temperature for all of those days? We can go back and look, boop, 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 right? What was your pace on those days? Right? Make you take a look. And what we're looking for here essentially is, where does that normalization happen, where we know that at X pace, say 840 minute miles, we get a heart rate of 134 beats a minute. And that's kind of your normal place. This way, when we plan your race and we look at you running 8-minute miles versus that 840, or 9-minute miles versus that 840, we have a relative understanding of what it means in the conditions that you've already had these sessions in. That allows us to then make better decisions about your pacing and better decisions about your nutritional allocation as well. Training and racing in the heat is just part of what we do right now, but you can actually use it to your advantage if you take the time to do it right, to go through the lessons here, but also to connect with your teammates as well, ask them questions, always being careful and never really putting your body in substantial physical risk, but making sure that you've created a space where you can test your limits, you can embrace the challenges that heat brings to the table, and then you can ultimately get better at it and hopefully get to a place where you can turn the heat into an advantage for you that you can carry for a long time. All right. Thanks so much for tuning in, folks. Coach Patrick here, signing off with another coach lesson. I'll be back next month. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing your comments, hearing your questions, either at office hours on Monday night, or put them here inside the community as well. All right. Take care, everyone. I'll see you